guys. Welcome to Book Frenzy 2021, the secondary version. I certainly wish that you were here with me instead of my talking to my computer all by myself. But let's get on to the book review since there's no other distractions. Hopefully you have downloaded the handout so that you can take notes as we go. If you miss anything, you can always go to kissthebook.blogspot.com and the reviews are there. You just don't get my interesting side comments as I go along. I do want to mention that this year we do have some honorable mentions. We may not have done the volume of reviews that we've done in the past because, COVID stopped a lot of publishers from getting a lot of books out in the spring, in the summer. But what we did get to read, there was a lot that we loved very, very much. And so there in the secondary, there's probably about 10 books that I've included as honorable mentions that my heart just wanted to have on the list, but I knew that I could never get through them in the 45 minutes that I have to share with you. So let's get going. Our first book is a picture book. And this one, I believe it would really be a boon to either any artistic class, language arts, when they want to have some inspiration, any of your art classes. It's called The Imaginaries, Little Scraps of Larger Stories. Excuse me. By Emily Winfield Martin. You can tell I haven't done a lot of talking because my throat's already dry. This should be an interesting 45 minutes. So Imaginaries is a whimsical collection of painting, paper scraps, phrases, and small illustrations. It's a compact way to spark creativity, whether artistic or literary. Teachers really of any grade level could use this for starters. What I would do, and I'm going to show this to my language arts and my art teachers, is I would ask the publisher for permission to buy 2 or 3 copies and take them apart, laminate the individual pages, and then give them out to students randomly for story starters or drawing starters or any of that kind of thing. Next up, we had The Invisible Alphabet by Joshua David Stern and Ron Barrett. And this again is also a picture book. What I love about this one is that it is an ode to something that's not there, whether it's gone, clear, or disappeared. Stein has collaborated with the illustrator of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs for words and situations describing something that is not there. I would love to share this with any age, again, of reader or writer. I think that this would spark a great discussion in a language arts class in particular about vocabulary and how to be more creative with how students describe things. All the Way to the Top, How One Girl's Fight for Americans with Disabilities Changed Everything, is by Annette Bay Pimental, and is illustrated by Nabi H. Ali. So when Jennifer was 8 years old, the Americans with Disability Act was struck in Congress. In order to show their plight, Jennifer, who lives in a wheelchair, and many others literally crawled the way up the steps to Congress because there was no other way for them to get there. Showing my age, I actually remember seeing pictures and the news reporting this. And is such an inspiring story. The illustrations are great. And there's even a foreword by the Jennifer, who is now, of course, an adult woman, about what inspired her to get involved in all of that in the first place. There's information about the Americans with Disabilities Act and other great back matter. And our next book is another nonfiction picture book. And this one is The Catman of Aleppo. This is by Irene Latham and Kareem Shamsi Basha, and it's illustrated by Yuko Shimuzi. When the bomb started falling on Aleppo, Syria, Alaa stayed behind because he was working as an ambulance driver, which you can imagine he was very busy. but he also noticed that a lot of cats were being left behind and going feral or starving in the streets. And so he decided that he was going to start feeding a few, which then became many. And then he actually has a foundation set up where he receives money from all over the world from people to help him continue for the care of these cats. It's a beautiful story of love and hope. You know, it's not one of those where a middle school or high school student's probably going to pick it up on their own, but one of the things that I do is I'm always finding out what teachers are teaching, and I'll go in and I'll collect a big pile of picture books and maybe some nonfiction books, other nonfiction books, and just give them the books. And usually they find that on those little few downtimes that they have in the class time, that kids will pick these up and read them, or it would make for a great starter. And then we have Grow, Secrets of Our DNA by Nicola Davies and illustrated by Emily Sutton. This is an informative and visually delightful introduction to DNA. Any middle school or high school science teacher could usually use this as an opener, setting students up for a deeper investigation into these building blocks of our bodies and of nature. And we also have another science nonfiction picture book. I don't know what it is about science writers, but they just seem to do it so right. Most picture books that are nonfiction seem to be either science or biography. So Nature's Light Spectacular is written by Katie Flint and illustrated by Cornelia Lee. So when we think about nature and light, pretty much the first thing that's going to come to your mind is the Northern Lights. But Flint and Lee explore 10 other natural light-based phenomena. Lee provides the gorgeous illustrations, while Flint provides a case study from around the world, a simple scientific explanation, and some pop-up boxes with extra details. Any school that teaches earth science could use this one very easily. The illustrations are such that you really want to frame the pages and put them on your walls. Rescuing the Declaration of Independence. Welcome back to the War of 1812. How We Almost Lost the Words That Built America by Anna Crowley Redding and illustrated by Edwin Fotheringham. When James Monroe saw that the British were about to envelop Washington, D.C. in 1814, he sent word immediately to the new capital to remove the records. His secretary, Stephen Pleasanton, knew immediately what he meant. He had to get all of the documents out that were involved in founding of our nation, George Washington's diaries, and all those kinds of things. And that included the original copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. But it would take the help of many US citizens with their wagons and their horses to get all of these documents out of Washington, D.C. and into somewhere that was safe enough and far enough away that they would be safe from the British. This is a great story to add to the War of 1812. Any level class could use this if they're teaching that part of American history. The story is told in a very compelling way, and Fotheringham's illustrations have just the right old-fashioned look. There is a story about Dolly Madison that is from the exact same moment in history about how she saved the paintings that were hanging in the White House. And so the two of those books go together very easily. And one more science-based nonfiction picture book. This is a book to read with a worm. Step one, go find a worm. Then follow the author's instructions to investigate your worm, not just how it looks, but how it works, and without killing it, which is even better. Now, I can't make any promises how many worms will actually survive. Oh, sorry, you guys. But this will be a lot of fun. It will occupy an entire time period. Lots of giggles, lots of shrieks, but it will be so much fun. So moving on to nonfiction books. First, we have Becoming Muhammad Ali by James Patterson and Kwame Alexander. And this is illustrated, though not necessarily a graphic novel, by Dawad Ayonabuli. So this is a Kwame Alexander does the voice of Cassius Clay through his poetry, and James Patterson uses his prose to give us the voice of Cassius's best friend, Lucky. Even kids who have no prior knowledge of Muhammad Ali will be engaged and excited as they watch him as a young boy who is decided to focus everything he has on his boxing. The illustrations are incredible black and white drawings, and the illustrator is the one who did the crossover graphic novel. Then we have The Big Book of Monsters by Hal Johnson and illustrated by Tim Seibert. These are 25 stories that run the gamut from science fiction to folklore, legends, and horror. What's great is that besides a short synopsis about the history of each of the creatures, there's a section at the end of each of called Beyond the Book that gives added insight into the story or the culture that the story came from. And at the beginning of each of the stories, there's an inset that gives a few facts, like their powers, their dastardly deeds, and even their fear factor. This is a keeper. Now, I have a monster book that I've had in my library since 1989, and I have been nursing it along because there is just no other book out there like it. This book doesn't quite replace my giant big book monster book, but it comes really close, really, really close. Next, we have Blood and Germs, the Civil War Battle Against Wounds and Disease by Gail Jarrow. And this is a Jarrow who, if you look her up in your card catalog, you probably already have several books written by her. She uses her nonfiction skills to highlight the battle conditions of the American Civil War. Just the title and that cover will draw your students in. The chapters are long enough to be thorough. They're full of illustrations and photographs and spotlights on the key players in that the Civil War battle that took place on every battlefield to try to save lives. It's gross enough to catch their eye and then oh so interesting, but very appropriately done for both middle school and high school. So Dragon the Hoops is a nonfiction graphic novel by Gene Yang. He actually taught computer science at a high school in Oakland, California. And through Dragon Hoops, he tells us the story of just one season of their basketball team. And he weaves in the history of basketball. He gives glimpses into his own life and backstory on the players and the coaches of their team. It sounds a little self-indulgent, like why would we care about one small team from Oakland for one season? But Yang uses his characteristic heart and humor to draw us in, and there is plenty to like for even somebody who is not actually a sports fan. Now, Freiheit, the White Rose graphic novel, is by Andrea Grosso Saponte. And this was about the White Rose group during World War II. They were under an underground resistance movement to Nazis in Germany. Although they were Germans, they felt duty-bound to expose the Nazis and their atrocities and do what they could to wake up their fellow citizens. And for that, they were executed. Although it is a graphic novel, the book uses quotes from the White Rose members and others authors whose thinking is quite deep. Saponte even includes translations of leaflets that the White Rose group published, and her art is stunning, and the story is both inspiring and horrific. Our next nonfiction book is a collection of biographies, Noisemakers, 25 women who raised their voices and changed the world. What's really great is that each person gets a 7-page graphic novel biography, and all 25 of them are illustrated and written by 25 different female author illustrators. And I'm betting that you couldn't even name 25 female authors and illustrators. So not only do you get to meet 25 women, some of them you'll already know, but some of them you won't have heard of at all, I'm sure. And then you also get to meet 25 existing author illustrators. This is another one of those books where it'd be great to write to the publisher and say, hey, I want to rip several parts of this book apart and create small folders for each of the biographies and give them to my class, because any smart language arts teacher could come up with many different ways to use each of these biographies in their classroom. And then we have a memoir, Obsessed by Allison Britz, a memoir of my life with OCD. So when Allison was 15 years old, she had a dream that she had brain cancer. And she wakes up and believes that it's a warning, and that if she does certain things, then she will not get the brain cancer. And then as the days and the months go on, this voice inside her becomes more insistent and tells her that there are other things that she has to do in order to not get brain cancer. It gets so bad that it takes a toll on her relationships with her friends, with her parents, with her schoolwork. Even her hygiene is affected by this, but it's a fight between her and the voices, and she's not really sure who's going to win. It's a very engaging memoir. It's troubling yet very hopeful. Watching her OCD develop over a couple months and listening to Allison engage with the monsters in her head was haunting and very scary. The Other Side is a slim little book. It's the stories of Central American teen refugees who dream of crossing the border by Juan Pablo Villalobos. So Villalobos himself is from Mexico, and he has given us the stories, 11 different teenagers' immigration experiences, why they would risk their lives to cross the border, why they would cross over many dangerous spaces in order to make that crossing, and who they are trying or what they're trying to find on the other side. They're brief stories, but they're extremely compelling. It's a very quick read that will give students insights into immigration, especially illegal immigration, and why people would risk doing it. And it's very haunting. Now you have to realize the nonfiction books are in alphabetical order, so these next two books are related, but I did not put them together on purpose. The first one is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. And so once you read Oluo's book, you're going to want to read it again. And then the next time you read it, you're going to want to read it with a group, because you're going to want to ask questions. You're going to want to talk about what you read, but don't talk to your Black friend. Get a group of white people who are like-minded and want to learn, and ask them, because it is your job as a white person to learn about race and why it's important to think about and talk about race. Oluo weaves her own experiences into her honest look at the roadblocks and the problems that are thrown into the face of every non-white person, and not just in the US, but definitely in the US. This would be a great textbook for a civics class, or even a framework for a US history class, especially if you paired it with Stamped by Jason Reynolds, or with This Book is Antiracist, which is the next book on our list. This book is Antiracist, 20 Lessons on How to Wake Up, Take Action, and Do the Work by Tiffany Jewell, and it's illustrated by Aurelia Durand. So in 20 short lessons, readers learn about identity, their personal and social identity, their racial and ethnic identity, and about prejudice in history, including microaggressions, what to do when you see injustice, and so much more. What's really great is that even though it is a workbook, you do the work on your own paper. So the book itself is reusable over and over again. There's no place for the students to write in the book. While Tiffany Jewell has written the book for students of color to get them to understand that they have a voice and that their voice deserves to be heard, it can be used by anyone who wants to learn how to be an anti-racist. Now, before we move on to the novels, I do want to point out that I am not giving you any information about the content of the books. That information is available on your handout. It's also available on the blog. And I would like you to pay attention to the content and ratings, and you decide for yourself whether or not you want the book in your class, in your library. So the first book then is, I have, however, on the slides, put whether a book is strictly middle school or if it's strictly high school. Okay, anything that's not labeled is a crossover book between middle school and high school. So I have done that for you. So first we have Alone. 12-year-old Maddie wanted a secret sleepover with her best friends, but they both bailed on her. So when she wakes up in the next morning, her whole town is deserted. What? Yes, she's able to piece together finally that there was some kind of an emergency evacuation, but everybody also left their phones behind. So there's no way for her to contact anybody. She's only 12. She doesn't know how to drive a car. The landlines are not working. And so very slowly, Maddie has to learn how to survive in this new reality. She makes mistakes. She endangers her life. She does find companionship in a neighbor's dog that was left behind. But 1 year passes, 2 years passes, and now she gets to the worst part of all. She's surviving, but can she survive being alone? So it's a novel in verse. It's very quick. It's very engrossing. And I had so many questions when I was finished reading the book, because yes, there are glaring logic holes in the narrative. But as I pondered them, I realized that, you know what? I don't care. I read the book super fast in one sitting, and I loved it as I was reading it. It'd be a great one for a book discussion because there are going to be lots of questions. And so the kids will have lots to say to each other about this. The Ash Lords is science fiction. And basically you can call this Hunger Games on horses, at least this first one in the series. 3 lives in by Scott Rankin. 3 lives collide in a brutal contest during this year's race. A fight to the death on phoenix horses, beautiful beasts that need to be resurrected every night. And a skilled rider can use elements to manipulate that rebirth. The gorgeous cover will easily catch many eyes, and they won't be disappointed by the tale. One thing I did find odd is that one of the characters talks about herself in the second person. It is a breathless rush of action and danger, multiple ulterior motives, and the sequel just came out, and I was so happy to read it. It is a duology, 2 books only and done, and it was excellent. Then we briefly have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel to The Hunger Games, set in the year 10 of the Hunger Games, and this is where President Snow, or I don't remember what his name is anymore, but anyway, this is where we see where President Snow starts and who he is and what set him, why he is on the path that he is for when we see him in the Hunger Games. I listened to the audiobook and then I listened to it again, and this is one of those books where I am going to listen to it or read it a 3rd time because I loved it so much. City Spies is by James Ponti, and this is about Sarah Martinez, who's 12 years old, and she's in the British foster care system. She hates her foster parents so much because they are absolutely horrible. So she hacks into the juvenile justice system to expose them. Instead, she gets caught. She's faced with detention, but then she gets recruited by someone named Mother, who works for the British spy organization, and gets recruited to live with a team of young spies in Scotland to train and to go out when they're needed. And when she goes with another group of the spies to a youth summit in Paris, they have to stop a villainous plot that would endanger many lives. So Sarah and her crew obviously have some really mad skills. The story was engaging and extremely well paced. People who like Ali Carter's Gallagher's Girls series or people who are not quite ready for Robert Muchamore's Cherub series would really enjoy this. Clap When You Land is by Elizabeth Acevedo. When a man dies in a plane crash, two girls, one who lives in America and one who lives in the Dominican Republic, find out that he's been leading a double life and that they are half sisters. So this again is a novel in verse. It's told through two voices. The change in the voice between the American girl and the Dominican girl is absolutely brilliant. You'll never have any question of which girl that you're listening to. The story is poignant and extremely sad. It has grief, it has pain, it has tension. There's some stalking, dangerous love, and crisis. So lots to unpack in that. Then we have Closer to Nowhere by Ellen Hopkins. Now this is about 12-year-old Hannah, who knows her cousin Cal has dealt with a lot of crap. His mother died of cancer 3 years ago. His entire life, his father's been oppressive, he's been abusive, and even more so towards Cal since his mom has died. But now Cal's dad is in jail, and Cal is staying with Hannah's family. Cal knows that he has struggles. He can't always control his temper. He doesn't know how to communicate with anybody in any sort of meaningful way. And he doesn't know what to do in order to overcome the abuse. Then Hannah's family starts to fall apart. Cal feels like he's to blame. Hannah feels like he's to blame. And she even knows in her heart that it's not fair to blame Cal for what's happening to her. So this time, Hopkins uses her free verse style to explore the effects of anger and addiction in the child of drug addicts at a level that is totally appropriate for middle school. I don't always love free verse, as you know, but Hopkins does a great job of this particular topic. Connect the Dots, on the other hand, is about 12-year-old Oliver Bean and his best friend, Frankie Fig. They live in a suburb of Chicago. Then arrives a new girl named Miranda to their town, and she looks around the cafeteria and decides that Oliver and Frankie are going to be her gang of friends while she's in Chicago. Now, they don't have any say. Their school is named after Preston Oglethorpe, who was an Elk Grove genius. He made millions and millions of dollars, and then he disappeared. Now, strange things are starting to happen. Most of them seem to be happy coincidences, but there's also a group of dangerous men lurking in the shadows, and their attention seems to be on Oliver, Frankie, and Miranda. So, you know the old saying, a butterfly flaps its wings in the forest, and then hundreds of miles away, there's a hurricane. Well, in this case, it starts with mango chutney, or the lack of mango chutney. And if you want to know what happens with that mango chutney, it's hilarious, and you'll just have to read the book to find out. So Dear Justice is the sequel to Dear Martin. And I rarely do sequels, but this one I believe needs to be taken into consideration all on its own. This is by Nick Stone. So Justice from the first book is off to college, but Quan, who grew up just one block away, is sitting in a youth detention facility accused of shooting a police officer. In his frustration, Quan starts writing to Justice, using flashbacks. Quan's story of how a bright, curious, and kind boy ended up here unfolds. I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of swearing in this book, but every word belongs. Pair this immediately with Sharon Flake's The Life I'm In and Teach. Then hand your student stamped from the beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. And you'll have rich material for talking about social justice, the prison system, and a way to open white eyes to all the different kinds of lives that are going on around them. And speaking of The Life I'm In, it should be on this list too, but I haven't been able to make myself sit down and write the review because it's just too painful. But you should know that The Life I'm In is fit for an older audience than The Skin I'm In. Don't Judge Me is about sixth grader Hazel and her BFF Tori. They're just about to enter middle school. Now, Tori's older brother is an 8th grader, and Hazel has had a crush on Ben for a long time. One day, however, Hazel's over at Tori's house, and she finds a notebook that Ben was trying to hide from her. And when she takes the notebook and looks in it, she finds that every page is the name of a girl at the middle school. And the boys have anonymously made comments about them, about their looks, about their sexiness, about their willingness, and those kinds of things, and rated each one of the girls. Hazel decides that she needs to steal the book and to do something about this. So she decides to gather the girls to counterattack this awful behavior from the boys. However, they're going to have a very hard time getting adults to listen to them. Schroeder skillfully addresses the hot continual topic of sexual harassment in schools, and she does it in a way that's totally honest, but also very accessible to the intended audience. If you have Maybe He Likes You by Barbara D., then this is one that should be paired with it immediately. Finally, our first bit of fantasy. This has been an interesting year because almost everything on the list is realistic fiction, and there's very little fantasy or science fiction to share. But here we have our first one. So 5 years ago, an angry young witch cast a curse of without on the princesses of Ever. And Princess Jane, 5 years ago, was cursed on her 13th birthday without the ability to eat. She is, after 5 years, she's just barely hanging on. It is about time for the youngest of the sisters to be cursed. And with that curse will also come the possibility of them breaking the curse. But it's going to take a lot more than Jane. It's going to take a lot more than Jane and her sisters. It's even going to take a lot more than Jane, her sisters, and that angry young witch to break this particular curse. This is told in alternating perspectives of Jane and of Reagan, who is the witch. It's a fairy tale that has excellent, very strong female characters. There are some triggers, but the author warns right up front that there are triggers for sexual assault and for eating disorders. However, the treatment of both of them is very sensitively done instead of being graphic. Everything Sad is Untrue is by Daniel Nayeri. So when Koshuru's mother converted to Christianity, she was forced to abandon her medical practice and flee from Iran, with her family or risk being killed. So Koshuru was born into privilege. They are from a very distinguished Iranian family. Both of his parents were medical professionals. And now he's living in poverty in a small town in Oklahoma with just his mother, his sister, and his stepfather. His entire culture has been left behind in Iran. Daniel, as he has been renamed, is telling his story to his classmates and his teacher using the flair of Scheherazade, weaving together old Persian tales and his own family stories and relating them to his current situation and his troubles. Though this is not a nonfiction book, this is definitely Nayeri using fiction as a way to frame his own story of being a refugee. Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley is about Della, who is 10 years old, and her sister Suki, who is 16 years old. The two of them have been recently placed in foster care. It should have happened years ago when their own mother was incarcerated, but somehow they were under the radar and have been living with Clifton, who is definitely not their father. When something terribly specific happens, the girls run, and now Clifton is in jail awaiting trial. The older sister, Suki, has always been there for Della, watching out for her, making sure that everything was okay, and protecting her. But now Della is coming to realize that nobody was ever there to protect Suki. So Fighting Words is hard-hitting, raw story that deals with the after effects of sexual abuse. Suki had to grow up fast as the primary caretaker for her younger sister, while Della, who swears a lot, but when she swears, as she's writing in this journal, she uses the word snow instead of the swear word, is coming to terms that her sister was abused, but without relating or even knowing all of the specific details. It's a very careful handling of a very serious topic. Coming from the point of view of a 10-year-old leaves a lot to be filled in by the reader. And of course, the more background knowledge you bring to the story, the more the story blooms and the more your heart will ache for these sisters. Give and Take is by Ellie Swartz. So ever since the day her own grandmother, or Nana as she calls her, stopped recognizing her, Maggie has tried to hold tight to every single memory, which means that she holds on to things in order to help her remember. It might be a beautiful necklace that her grandmother gave her, but it also might just be a milk carton from lunch because she had such a great time with her friends. Her locker is full, her closet is full, underneath her bed is becoming full. Then her mom announces that they're going to foster a baby before her adoption placement. Well, Maggie's not going to want to let go of that baby, so how do you hold on to a baby? Luckily, Maggie's family finally realizes that there is a problem. They're there for her. They find her a therapist, and slowly, very slowly, as Maggie's story continues to unfold, she's able to let go of these things that she's been hoarding and process her feelings. I have seen lots of books about kids whose parents are hoarders. This is the first one I've seen about a child who is a hoarder. And I love the long look that even after Maggie's problem is diagnosed, that we get to see into the therapy aspects that work for her. Ground Zero, a novel of 9/11 by Alan Gratz. So it's 2001, Brandon's in trouble. So he has to go to work with his dad today. And his dad is a chef at the restaurant on the 107th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Segue to 2019. Reshamina is a poor village girl who lives in Afghanistan. She's just trying to survive the skirmishes between the Afghan rebels and American soldiers. She doesn't even know why the Americans are there, but she does know for sure that they killed her oldest sister on her oldest sister's wedding day. Wow. Each of these characters could have an incomplete novel of their own. By juxtapositioning the two of them from 2001 to 2019, we get an even more powerful story. Students who weren't yet born on the day of 9/11 don't understand the lasting scars that were left by those events on so many all around the world. But anyone who reads this needs to read the story and understand Rishamina's point of view. A High Five for Glenn Burke is by Phil Bildner. This is about Silas Wade, who is a sixth grader who is crazy about baseball. So when Silas is asked to do a school report, he decides to do one on Black baseball player Glenn Burke, who also invented the high five. And no one's surprised. But for Silas, the report is even more so meaningful because he finds out that Glenn Burke was also gay. And this particular fact becomes increasingly more important to Silas. It's written with humor and sensitivity, and it's a must read for anyone who's struggling to figure out who they are and how they fit in. The House of Salt and Sorrows is by Aaron A. Craig. Once there were 12 Falmouth girls with a loving mother and father, but the mother died the same day the last of the sisters was born. Over the last 5 years, 4 of the daughters have died. And now Anna Lee has become second in line, and she is sure that the last of them was definitely murdered. As she investigates, the odd, mysterious air around the family intensifies. A bit of romance frames mystery after mystery as Annalee becomes even more sure that the gods themselves are against them when it comes to breaking this curse. Craig has written a very well-drawn world with a story that lovers of gothic romance or retold fairy tales would be sucked into. The retold tale is the 12 Dancing Princesses. I know, she includes even everything you expect from the original, but twists it far beyond what you could ever predict. Boy, guys, we are running out of time here. I'm wondering if I can sneak 5 extra minutes out of this. We'll see. The Inheritance Games is by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is about Avery Kylie Grimes, who has her life overturned one day when she is approached at school by a man who says that she has been mentioned in the will of a very rich man, Tobias Hawthorne. And he has left her $46 billion. He's also left her a puzzle. And that puzzle needs to be solved by her and his four handsome grandsons in a game of riddles and puzzles. Thankfully, Avery is smart enough to hold her own and peel back the layers of mystery that Tobias has left behind. You might think that this is the Westing game, but it's not. It's very dangerous, it's very intense, but it's also meant to hit at the heart. Number 2 is coming out in September. Internment is by Samira Ahmed. Layla and her parents are in a dusty, forlorn place near the old Manzanar camp from World War II, along with other Muslims from all over the United States. Her primary thought is to get word to her boyfriend, David, about where she is, and she might be successful, but she also might find herself being the unwilling poster girl for rebellion inside the camp. Well, for David, Lila is willing to do almost anything. Ahmed brings a painful look at modern racism in America. We're super close to being done, you guys. It's The End of the World as I Know It by Matthew Landis. The world is ending in 19 days, but 8th grader D is the only one who seems to care. He's determined to finish and furnish his shelter before the day comes, but the girl next door, who seems really familiar, keeps coming around and involving D in her harebrained schemes. Somewhere in his memory is her, and life has changed since she left. Dee's world will definitely change forever in 19 days, but not in the ways that you think. You look at this book and you think post-apocalyptic, but it's not. It is definitely about world-shattering events, but those kinds of world-shattering events happen every single day, but on an individual basis. Library of Lost Things is by Laura Taylor Namey. This is about 17-year-old Darcy, who is counting the days until she turns 18. Not so that she can leave her home, but because the DCSF can no longer take her away from her mother, a mother who is a hoarder. As Darcy starts developing a relationship with a new boy, Asher, she has to decide how much of her life she is willing to share with him. This is another dimension of the psychology of hoarding. This time it is a parent who is the hoarder, but Darcy along the way realizes that she has her own problems with hoarding of a different sort. Okay, we're gonna skip More Than Maybe and go to My Eyes Are Up Here by Laura Zimmerman. This is about 10th grader Greer. She knows that her breasts are large. They are cup size J. There's not a lot that she can do to minimize them. She and her best friend Maggie are excited for this new year. Each of them have chosen different curriculars, but they've actually managed to stay friends. And there's Jackson, who's new, who's super cute, and he seems to like Greer as much as she likes him. Greer realizes that she actually has some natural talent and actually delights in playing volleyball, but if she is going to join the team, then her girls are going to need a whole different kind of support, which brings in all kinds of interesting challenges. While Zimmerman manages to be realistic about Greer's body challenges, she does it without being scatological. There is a little bit of side story about harassment that Greer gets, but that's not the heart of the story. Okay, we are going to skip down to Scars Like Wings. This is about Ava, who used to have a mom and a dad and a best friend who was her cousin Sarah, but that was a year ago. Now Ava has a big toe as a thumb, a claw is all that's left of her other hand, and a patchwork of skin grafts all over her face and her body. She was the only one to survive the fire that took the other three's lives. Her aunt and uncle, who are Sarah's parents, have taken Ava in to help her and during this time, and then support her as a loving niece, as they have loved her in her life. But everybody's decided it is time for Ava to go back to the real world, and that means trying school. Ava promises that she's going to give it 2 months, but she's hoping that she'll be able to get out in 2 weeks. But she doesn't predict that she would meet Piper, who is wheelchair-bound victim of a car accident, or that she would meet a boy who is just so clueless that everything he does ends up being kind. She doesn't anticipate finding her singing voice again or rekindling her love of the theater. My heart sang as I read this, and the author, Aaron Stewart, lives here in Salt Lake City. So if I were a high school librarian, I would get a hold of Aaron Stewart and book her to come into my library. Okay, we're going to skip down to Together Apart. And this is by Aaron A. Craig and Company. Now, Life as We Knew It stopped for last March, the pandemic of 2020. But meanwhile, our dreams and our lives have actually gone on. We have 9 short stories by names familiar and unfamiliar that talk about this new time in our world. They are all fun to read. You'll be hard pressed to find a favorite among all of them. All of them have a bit of hope within them. And we know that they have the feeling of to be continued, because that's where our lives are right now, to be continued. Okay, 2 more books, and I'm going to call it quits. Under the Broken Sky is by Mariko Nagai. This is about 12-year-old Natsuo, who lives with her father and her little sister Asa in Manchuria, China during World War II. Now, a part of China is under Japanese occupation, and so the Japanese conscripts their father into the army, and Natsu is heartbroken and is alone in charge of Asa until they are taken in by a widow who lives nearby and becomes their auntie. Then when their farm is overtaken, she has to take her little sister and on foot follow the other refugees from their town and try to journey towards and find a way across the channel to Japan itself. This is a historical fiction novel in verse about a part of World War II that is very little known, but Natsu's story of courage and determination will make your heart ache. Okay, last book, calling it quits. When You Know What I Know is by Sonia K. Salter. So when 10-year-old Tori tells her mom that Uncle Andy has molested her, at first her mom doesn't believe her. It has to be a misunderstanding, right? Well, Tori is filled with shame. She's angry. She's confused. Her whole life has changed in just those few moments. Her every thought now is consumed with what ifs, until finally somebody starts believing her. Salter tells Tori's story in free verse again, but this is a great way to capture the thoughts of a child who has experienced trauma. Tori may be young, but her story is pertinent for a wide range of ages. The person who reviewed this book has family members who have experienced this kind of abuse, and she says that she would be comfortable with any of her family members reading this particular book. So don't be afraid to embrace this book. It doesn't focus on the abuse. It focuses on the feelings and the healing from the trauma. So there you go. I didn't quite make it through all 50 books. Hopefully you'll have a chance to go back to the blog and read about those other books that I had to skip. But thank you so much I had a great time with you guys today, and I will talk to you later.